Thank you. And we're so excited to be here today. We're going to talk a little bit with our panelists about UX and their career paths and the experiences they've had along the way. We definitely hope that you guys will engage with us online. This is really your chance to be able to ask questions for our UX experts. And we will do our best to make sure that we ask as many of those questions as possible. But to kick things off, I just want to say thank you to our panelists and welcome. And I really wanted to just start by asking each of you, where did you get your start and where are you today? Maybe we can start with you, Dayton.
So I actually didn't go to school for design or any of those. I went to school for engineering. I graduated in 1999, and shortly after that, I decided that I didn't really want to be an engineer. So I actually, my first foray into design or any kind of thing was with Flash. And this was a really long time ago. I can't remember. But then really understanding how motion and design could start to really communicate interesting things was really where I started. And then, then it's a long story after that, but that's where I started. And
do you want to tell the audience a little bit about where you are today?
Right now I run a UX design company that focuses on helping businesses identify opportunities to build really great products that people want. And we go through the entire UX process from research to testing and in between with IA, visual design, and prototyping. And I've also had a ton of experience with actually building out full-blown software. So yeah, that's what I do now after 16 years.
Amazing. Thank you. What about you, Lee?
I started as a graphic designer, which back when I started meant that we didn't even, for example, use a computer for the first year of the program that I went to. So to segue into what is now, and what I think is so important about our industry now is the ability to use digital to understand behavior, and in addition to any kind of non-digital means of understanding user goals and requirements, is that digital has played such an important role in any kind of design industry over the last 20 years. And it's only becoming more so. So I've had to navigate that on my own for the last 20 years or so. And hopefully, how many students are here or recent graduates? Oh, it's kind of a mix. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you guys are in such a wonderful position because you've grown up in this space. There's really so much opportunity there now to leverage digital to make better product, to do better work. So segues to what I'm doing now is very similar to Dayton. I run a studio here in Toronto. Our difference is slightly different locale, but much of the same practice. One of the things that I'm really excited about right now that I guess we'll get into with some of the questions is that a lot of what we're doing now is helping teams at the clients that we serve deliver better product internally. So a lot of the disconnect between what you can achieve as an individual or what you can achieve as a consultancy is actually getting teams working better together, which segues to your talk later. So this is a really exciting afternoon.
Great. How about you, Maya? Tell us a little bit about where you came from.
Sure thing. So I started off as also very much like Lee in traditional print design. So I went to school for that. I worked at a print agency for a few years in Chicago doing logos and brochures and invitations and all that kind of stuff. And then I remember we started getting requests for websites, and I asked my boss, I was like, can I just learn on the job? Like, can you just give me some time? I'll figure this out, and I'll just build us some websites, and we don't have to outsource. And he was like, okay. So I started building really, really shitty websites using tables and just like whatever I could do, and just taught myself on the job. And then my husband got a job at a tech company in the Midwest, And I moved with him, and it was the first time I was looking for a job in the Midwest, and I found this company, this tech company that just wanted me to do web design, and I was like, okay. And that's how I transitioned and just learned full time. And I was doing UX before I knew what UX was, before it was really a thing in the industry. Or it might have been, but it was still very in its infancy and really small. So everything I've learned digitally has been 100% on the job. And right now, working at Etsy, my title is product designer, which was also something that was like an evolution to figure out, like, what am I? What are my skills? What are the titles? The titles in this industry change so fast, and I've probably had like 6 different titles. And as product designer, I'm responsible for the user experience, the user interface, and I do a little bit of front-end development as well.
Great, thanks. So each of you seems to have definitely evolved in this space over time and in different ways. What would you say, has there been anyone influential or, that you've been able to learn from in your career?
I think, like, for me, the first job I had, I was working with like a design master, just like really amazing focus on typography, learning so much of the detail of type. That was I would say from a mentor perspective, that was the one I had. And after that, I pretty much have learned a lot myself and have really been just looked at the internet and reached out to peers. I haven't really had a very specific mentor. I don't know about you guys.
I can think of a couple. This was early days, again, when the world was taken over by Flash, which was an awesome time, by the way. I'm really sad that it's gone. But I think a lot of the work of some digital artists actually influenced me quite a bit. Eric Natsky, who's presented at FITC numerous times. Hillman Curtis, the late Hillman Curtis. I loved his book, Making the Invisible Visible. Very, very cool. And then there's been, like, it's always been on the artistry side of things that I just really enjoyed, the process of delivering the kind of work that they ended up delivering using digital or programming as a medium, which was very cool. And then more recently with just this lean movement, using lean processes and lean principles to get to results faster, because they're much more meaningful if you get them done sooner, because you can change and iterate more quickly. So that's me.
Great.
Yeah, I think there are two kind of aspects to this question. One of them is mentorship, and the other one is influence. And I had the pleasure of seeing Eric Ries speak in 2008 in San Francisco, and he was just figuring out this lean stuff then for himself. And he had it. It wasn't 17 books yet, but or a series of books with multiple authors, but he had it figured out, and that presentation changed the course of our business, which I had just started. So sometimes I don't know. I probably wouldn't have heard about lean till 3 years later if I hadn't been there for that talk, which was also a series of serendipitous events. Ended up coming back there from South by Southwest in Austin, and it was just fluke. So I think just being exposed and exposing yourself to different opportunities to learn. One of the other things that I've been very careful about is not trying to pigeonhole my learning into just my sphere of work. So if you're a UX designer, don't just read UX people. A lot of the lean movement comes from industrial or manufacturing processes, and
Toyota.
Yeah. And a lot of the practices and this is where I started learning this back in the early days of the web, is everybody sitting there saying, we don't know how to build websites, we don't know how to code websites, we don't have process. We have to learn, we have to figure this all out because the web is this new thing. Well, industrial designers have been doing this for years. Software programmers have been doing this for years. The web is just a new medium. And so you bring best practices to it. You don't ignore everything else that could possibly influence you to self-discover. And that's one of the important things. And we talk about collaboration. You'll talk about collaboration later. But don't be insular. Don't try to figure everything out yourself. There are experts around you, and lean on them, and that's the mentorship side, is that if you're trying to get better, the best way to do so is to work with smarter people, learn from smarter people, and engage them. And most people who are senior in any kind of industry are interested in helping the next generation. You know, they want to provide that kind of support, and are interested in seeing really smart people learn and grow. So mentorship is a really important thing. I don't have too many great stories about mentorship because I haven't been proactive about that as much as I should have been in my early career. So I encourage anybody else, if you're in an early stage of a career, or any point of your career, find somebody who you can bounce ideas off of and learn from. One good example, which takes us out of UX, but in the design space, Doyle Young was a wonderful typographer and really, really nice guy, and I had the pleasure of having a series of conversations with him just because I asked. I said, hey, would you be interested in sharing? And he had passed away a number of years ago, but you know, there was a period of about 5 years where we had regular conversations, and that was, in a sense, more of a side passion project because typography is an important part of UX, but not to the artistic level that it is in you know, poster design or typography and or making typefaces and so on. So anyway, that it's very rewarding to be able to learn from the best and ask for their help.
And so it sounds like also, you know, the evolution of UX has definitely changed, obviously from the past to the present. Can you guys share a little bit about how that change or how that evolution has evolved?
I mean, I have some thoughts on that. So I think the thing that hasn't changed is that it's user experience. It's the focus on the user and making sure we do the best we can for the user. So that's something that's just stayed consistent throughout. I think a lot of methodologies came early on, but like the adoption of them and the evolution of them has taken a lot of time. There's a lot, like now that the community is larger, people are experimenting with different techniques. There's a lot more of the collaborative techniques out there that you can try. Like the Sprint book just came out, and I also highly recommend reading it. It's just like people are experimenting with different sort of, all those techniques that are in Sprint, they've been around forever. But somebody decided, okay, we're going to take this one and this one and this one, and we're going to make it into 5 days, and we're going to try to achieve this goal. It's really just like repackaging and seeing how things can work for us. So I think it's like a lot of the foundations and principles have been around for a very long time. We're just sort of iterating on them and figuring out how to use them better. And I think also a lot of the technology that we use has changed. So the programs we have at our disposal, I used to use Axure, which is like a really heavy-handed prototyping tool. I use InVision now. It's just like those like day-to-day workflow things have changed a lot, but the underlying things that I do are very similar.
I think one of the elements of UX that has matured is really the research component, where now like well-established or mature UX teams really understand that user research, user testing, split testing, A/B testing, all of these things that surround the product after you launch it or before you launch it are extremely important elements to the product's success. When it's before it's launched, we use qualitative testing, to after it's launched, we use quantitative testing. So I think that's typically not in the designer's domain, but I think that it should be. It should absolutely be. And it's certainly in my domain. I make sure that it's a practice that we have. But yeah, I mean, you won't see the visual designer going out and running an A/B test as much as you should. You should expect them to be able to say, okay, well, I'm going to put this button and this layout and this type like this, but that's not going to be the end of it. I'm going to test whether that performs well over time, with a split test or an A/B test.
Yeah, that was something Tom was asked, was how do you kind of prepare your client for the fact that you might be wrong? And I think, from our point of view, we try to make as fast a decision as possible to put a line in the sand when we're doing work and say, okay, we're going to ship this. We're going to get this into the hands of a customer in order to learn. That's the key. It's not about making the right decision with a layout or a color. Thank you, Google, for your wonderful test of 250 blues. It's about getting it in the hands of the actual customer so that you can learn from their behavior and how they respond. So getting something to market quickly is very important from our point of view, but also knowing that as a designer or somebody working in the space, whether you're a researcher, designer, whoever it is, that product that you ship is a learning tool. That's the goal.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, so a lot of times working in agencies, we'll ship things and then you say goodbye to it. You never see it again. But I think in order for like the lean to work, where you send out something that's so the minimal that you can get out to really validate that it's right, you really have to know that you can come back and iterate on that later. So that's like a super important component of that, to not just like put it out into the world, but make sure you have an opportunity built in to go back and learn from that and iterate on what you did.
And that's our new job as designers, is to set that expectation so that the client doesn't think, you guys are the best at what you do, and therefore when you hand me something, I'm done. Nothing is done in this world. That's an opportunity, and it's also the wonderful thing about where we're at today, where we haven't been before, is that every single time somebody clicks on something, if it's a digital product, you can learn. There's data that you can track behind the scenes behaviorally that you can then, do some big data analysis on, or you can do some very specific one-to-one analysis if you have screen recording software, for example, and see how an actual user is performing on your product. And then, of course, we have all of our kind of one-to-one or direct techniques of asking people questions and getting feedback. All of this mix of research and analysis is vital to us being able to continually iterate and deliver a better product, which should be the goal, in my mind, of every designer.
Great. So it definitely seems to be a little bit more iterative than it has been in the past. Jeff from the audience would like to know if you could give one UX tip each, what would it be? Maybe something to help them, be, better going forward as changes happen.
What my number one thing is that we rely on a lot of passive research right now, and it's so important to sit down with somebody and to have the chance to have a one-to-one discussion if you can do usability testing with a person, rather than just being passive about letting analytics and data come to you, and even looking at screen recordings. Screen recordings are amazing. They're way better than Google Analytics, for example, but they're not as
They don't tell
insightful.
you the why, right?
Yeah, that and just the intent, right? In our work, we talk a lot about intent. It's important to serve a purpose and to have a goal. And when you're watching a screen move around, or you're seeing a data point that a user went from here to there, you still don't know why exactly.
You also don't know how people feel, like
Yes.
the emotions behind there too.
But face recognition software will solve that.
Jem wants to know what your sense of the UX job market in Toronto is like. Is it exciting? Is it growing? Is it overheated, competitive, or saturated?
No idea.
Those are a lot of questions, but what's your take on the Toronto job market, or maybe the North American job market for UX?
My take is that if you're good and you're looking for a role, please talk to me.
Likewise, Etsy's hiring.
Everybody is hiring because great people are always difficult to find, and I think in my mind I'm bullish on this because, again, as we get more connected, as we are more participative in digital channels, we have more data, which means we can do more with it to make better products, which means that our industry is one of those that's growing in its impact and therefore for businesses and organizations. So we need better people. Everybody's trying to hire better people, and technology is only growing in its influence and capability, which means that we need more smart people to navigate that.
I'm going to actually answer this last question also with this question. So my UX tip is not to just specialize. And I think we might touch on that a little bit later. But I think one of the most valuable things in my career has been that I've just always been really curious about sort of the edges of what I do. So when I started in print design, the edge was web. So starting to get into that. Once I started doing web, it was like, wait a second, I need to validate what I'm doing, and sort of started to experiment with research and development. So it's just always sort of expanding what I'm doing, and that's just probably been one of the most valuable things in having a career for me. And so like that for sure. But I would say that like people who are curious and want to expand outside of just their skill set are so valuable right now. As you like, finding product designers is extremely hard. Good product designers. We're always on the lookout. So yeah, I'd say the market is great, but for people who have experience and the desire to really branch out and learn.
For me, I think a UX tip is I think if you have an inherent skill of observation, observation is a big deal. You observe absolutely everything just unconsciously. If you have that, you'll likely make a really great UX designer. By observing how people use your products, or observing how you use your products, or having the empathy to understand how somebody else might actually use your product is a really strong skill. And I know that the sort of the popular word for UX designers is empathy, but it's true.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah, there's absolutely a reason for that, and it is very true. So just understand how empathy actually applies into the work that you're doing.
So I think, it's unanimous. The UX job market is hot. Do you guys think that the title UX designer will be around in 5 years? Why or why not?
I don't know. Before UX designer, I don't even know what it was called.
Yeah, I hope not. I mean,
it's very confusing.
Yeah. We've got interaction designers, UX designers, experience designers.
UI UX designers,
UI
product
UX.
designers.
Yeah.
Web designers, maybe.
Sure. Web managers? They used
What's
to
an
be
interaction designer? I used to be an interaction designer 10 years ago. It was
Right.
different. It was different then.
Well, this is the program. We were talking at lunch about what schools are, and I think there's an interaction design program.
But I don't know what it is.
Right. It's user-centered design.
So I actually met a interaction designer at D2L, actually. The MC is from D2L. And apparently an interaction designer is one that connects the flow of the interface together. But isn't that just a designer?
No,
Right?
well, that's what I'm
It's
saying.
just
All of
crazy.
these titles are
Very
effectively the
confusing.
same thing. Yeah.
So it could change. It could be that there's 10 more titles to add to that list.
Also true. Yeah.
Machine learning,
Data designer.
Customer experience designer. That's another
service
one.
designer. That's a thing. It's
Yeah.
a thing
Yeah,
right now.
services.
They're
It
all
is.
things.
Totally.
All of these things are things that are very confusing.
So for our audience, what do you think the best way to stay current and innovative is? I mean, the titles may change, but to be relevant in this industry, in this space.
I can only tell you what I do. I always try to put myself in a position of discomfort. If I'm uncomfortable, then I'm probably forcing myself to learn something. And I throw myself into various random sort of situations of learning something new. Medicine and fintech is something that I'm interested in currently, because I don't know enough about it, and I think it's a big disruptive industry right now, and I need to be relevant.
Yeah, I think I'll maybe share some of that sentiment about being uncomfortable. When you hear about opportunities like that are kind of trends maybe within, and you seek out these trends like design sprint trend, if you will, it's a new process. It's something that you're not going to know much about necessarily. You're not going to be comfortable running through it. But the first time you do it, it will probably be awful. But you have to challenge yourself to in my mind, usually do something 3 to 5 times before you can actually make a judgment on it as far as process is concerned. So again, don't get comfortable with where you're at because the technology is changing, the processes are being refined, and so on. So seek out new processes. I mentioned Eric Ries and the lean movement, which radically changed our business after 2008. Now the thing that I'm putting, that I've kind of framed our process around is customer journey mapping. That's largely been the foray of marketing and sales groups. It should be the foray of every single person working on products.
I love journey maps. They're great.
Yeah. So, that's something that if you haven't heard of that, or you think it's a sales and marketing tool, it's a really powerful product definition tool. And more than that, it's a very powerful business decision-making tool. So that's something that you should be looking into, and you should be maybe confused by it or not quite understand it, and dig into it until you can understand the difference between making assumptions about how people do things and actually learning how they do them, and mapping that out, learning their behavior, not your expectation of their behavior, mapping that out, and then figuring out how you can use that as a tool to make decisions about the work that you do. That would be, it's not something you're going to get day one, but if you keep working at it, you'll discover something new.
What about you, Maya?
Sure. So I think our profession is still pretty new. Like people who have been doing accounting, like accounting probably hasn't changed. It's changed, but it's a profession that people know about and it's been around for a long time. And I think it's just, since we're still sort of in probably teenage years, would you say? We're kind of teenagers, sort of in that figuring stuff out phase. Things are evolving super fast, and I think you have to stay current. I don't even think it's like, how do you? It's just like things are changing so quickly. It's just part of our job. And one thing we do at Etsy is a process called continuous deployment, where the engineers are pushing out code all the time, so maybe like 30 times a day. And we just actually hired somebody to bring the process of continuous learning to the company, because that is something that is so incredibly important for our industry. So not just for UX, but for engineers and for anybody working in what we're doing. It's just things are changing so fast. We have to keep learning all the time. And how can we put ourselves in environments and situations where we're continuing to do that? So whether it's coming to a conference like you guys are today, or surrounding yourself by people who are really good at the internet. I personally don't like spending hours diving into stuff, but I have friends who post links like a bazillion times a day, and those are the things I read.
If you have the time to do it, I actually haven't been on in a while because I haven't had the time to do it. There's a UX Slack group that's kind of like a global Slack group. So do you remember the name? Or
I'm part of it. I never go. I get overwhelmed with those.
We're too busy. Don't be too busy. Don't ever be too busy to learn. But yeah, there's a great Slack group. It's got multiple channels about UX fails and things you should be reading now. That would be a great resource if you're not sure where to start.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's so much content. It's just a matter of like figuring out what content you.
Yeah, there are channels on Medium for product design, for example. So if you want to try to look at a particular niche that you're not comfortable with within your sphere of design, and say, well, what does it mean to be a product designer? There's a whole channel on Medium with really smart people talking about that.
One more thing is that I run a design reading group at Etsy. So every month we pick a new book, and usually one that's sort of new on the market. We read it and we talk about it. And I never get around to reading books, so this has sort of forced me, because I'm the organizer, to actually read the books. So, like, again, uncomfortable situations, sort of setting yourself in, putting yourself in places where you're sort of committed to doing things, I find is a really great way to grow. And there's so many amazing books coming out with just people's, there's a story mapping book that we're reading right now by Donald Litchow.
It's a great book.
Yeah. There's just so much good material out there, but putting some structure around how you ingest it, like either being part of or organizing a reading group, is really helpful.
I can make one last quick recommendation on that subject of books, is A Book Apart from A List Apart. They're really short, bite-sized books, so you can grab, I think they've got like 6 or 8 of them now that they've published. And they're all, you could read them in a weekend.
Also, on that note, Rosenfeld Media is the other one that has tons of UX books. They're a bit chunkier, but they basically, if you just read a list apart and Rosenfeld media books, you're set. Like for now, that's great.
Those are some great tips. What about, we've talked about, how to stay current and innovative. I'm sure there's, we could probably talk about that almost all day as well. But let's talk a little bit about the changing technology in the UX space. What changes are you seeing? What changes do you predict to see in the future?
We just had a great talk on data. I mean, that's the big next step. We're right now in the middle of everybody being connected all the time. That was a huge change from the early 2000s, where the internet was a thing, and now we've all got computers in our pockets. So that's huge. It's still not been explored as much as it can be, the value of all being connected. And part of that is going to come with the data play and big data, is to say, okay, now we have all of this information. There's more, I don't remember the exact stat, but there's more information in like 8 months being generated by humanity than there has been in previous all of history. So this is kind of exponentially happening because we're all now connected. And that is both, there are frightening aspects of that and wonderfully opportunistic aspects of that. So so I think that's the key, is to not, I talked before about not relying on yourself and working with other experts and collaborating with people. Data is the next person we have to collaborate with, because they have way more insight than any individual. Data has way more insight than any individual. So finding a way to harness that is going to be a significant change in our industry.
Dayton, Maya?
I'm good.
So, it's something I'm really excited about and interested in, that kind of ties to data, is sort of how bots have been evolving recently and like the different ways to use them. So I personally have not designed a bot yet, but I just downloaded an app that walked me through the whole onboarding flow by just chatting with me. And that was like really exciting. And that's the only something we can do now, because we have that data, because we have technology that's smart enough to communicate with us and actually feel like, okay, I didn't feel exactly like a person, but I had so much more of a pleasant experience just being like, of course I'm going to do this and this and this because you asked me to, instead of like going through 5 different screens where I was like, okay, prompt now, change this. Okay, now give me access to this. It was a really lovely thing, and I just think that something to... You're itching to say something. Go ahead.
Well, the whole bot thing is interesting to me, because one of the challenges I have with bots is when you know that you're speaking to a computer. And so that's the case if it's an onboarding process or a phone that is, app. If you call Apple, it says, what are you calling me about? And you can tell it's not a human. Yeah. But I have a friend I was just chatting with who has written a bot for himself because he has multiple Airbnb properties. Oh, and it does all the booking process.
Dude.
Nobody knows it's not him. So that's very cool. If you can but you can exponentially accomplish more because someone is pretending to be you, or a bot is pretending to be you. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, there's like a lot of those personal concierge services that are still there. Sort of I don't think any of them is actually working quite well yet.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff that's happening in that sphere that I just sort of like watching.
And for a designer, that also becomes interesting because there's no UI.
Right.
There is a UI, but it's all text-based or possibly voice-based. Mm-hmm. So how do you design that? And that's where you get into the experience side of things. So that is a worthwhile thing for all of us to consider if we're pushing pixels.
So what about even, we were talking about, not just the UI. What about the Internet of Things and, really getting into more sort of, the environmental design and experience design from that perspective? Do you see a shift in experience design, user experience design, moving in that direction?
I can only speak about sort of what's happening in KW. There's an IoT incubator there called Sky something.
Skynet?
No, not Skynet. Not Skynet. Awesome. But it's really interesting because really when you're designing products that are connecting to devices, You're essentially gathering data and information from them and then making them behave based on that data. So if you just pretended for 1 second that that physical object actually wasn't physical and was another digital object, it's not very unlike, or the process that you would use to design for that particular product is not completely unlike what you do already. And it's really not out of the realm of your current understanding. So the technology is certainly much more difficult, where you have, like cell towers to deal with and SIM cards and hardware and all kinds of other crazy stuff. But the actual process of capturing all that data and then making it meaningful to the user is something that we already know how to do.
Yeah, I guess I'm big into efficiency. I don't actually like working, and I would prefer to find a way to not have to work.
I think the laziest designers are always the best designers. You have to figure out what to do.
So, no, I mean, it plays off of that, right? You're talking about connected things. Then if we can have data and we can have connected things and we can start to train them through data and artificial intelligence to operate for us rather than have to demand things of them. That's computing to now has always been, I need you to do something. And that's programming, is telling the system to do something. But if we can get the system to self-operate, that frees us up to do much more interesting things.
Like nothing.
Yeah.
Which is the best thing to do.
We could all be on panels.
This was hard work.
Yeah, I don't have much experience with experience design, so I'm just going to punt on this one.
Okay, no worries. What about, some advice for our future UX professionals? I know we talked about some tips about how to stay current and innovative, but maybe you can draw upon some of the lessons that you've learned throughout your careers or some of the mistakes you may have made, share them with, some of our up-and-comers to learn from you guys, the experts.
I like that we all have discussed that we're generalists. And I have arguments against that, but I think that's one of the interesting things that has come out of our discussion, is that we've jumped from career to career, in a sense, within the design space. And that's because we've challenged ourselves to dip into other areas that made us uncomfortable and also learn more. I think there's a lot of value to not being a generalist. If you can solve a really interesting problem. And I'm thinking about the idea of a data scientist. That's top of mind right now from the talk, and just where my head's at about the next wave for us as practitioners and creators. I should learn more about data science as a generalist, but I'm never going to be able to achieve what a data scientist would be able to achieve. So in that sense, that's not necessarily design or the traditional sense of a designer, but that data scientist then also has to learn how to apply the data. And that's the problem solving that we all learn as designers.
But I think that becomes where the job of the generalist is because you can recognize the skills of experts and how to take their skills and apply it to a context that they may not be familiar with.
Absolutely agree with you. The only
point
I'm making is if we're all generalists, then we don't have those specialists to draw upon.
True.
I guess one of the ways I think about it is like my specialty is design. And I know a little bit about engineering, I know a little bit about marketing, I know a little bit about strategy, and I know enough that I can be an informed partner to an expert. So I think that's where, like, if you know enough about how a website is built and a little bit and about the technology, and maybe you understand that there's a thing called a schema, and the schema is pretty difficult to change sometimes. If I have at least that kind of understanding, I can be an excellent partner. Mm-hmm. And if, like with the data science, like if I have a deep enough understanding of like, okay, this is what data science can do. These are the things that I can draw from, and I can work with a data scientist, and I can ask the right questions, and I can be informed enough that I'm a partner to them. That's how I like to see myself as a generalist, to be informed enough to be a valuable partner.
I think you've helped me with this concept as well. The answer for me is that all designers should be generalists. Mm. That I would agree with.
Great. So we have a couple more minutes. I wanted to open up the panel to audience questions. We have a question back there. Do you want to stand up so we can hear you?
Hi. I have a bit of a specific question. So
So just to make sure the rest of our audience heard, I'm going to summarize that question. When you are in the interview process and there's a design challenge, what could one do to prepare better for such a challenge, and what employers maybe should do in order to be able to prepare their interviewees?
Are you talking about actually laying something out on a screen or a piece of paper?
Can you give a simple example of a design challenge that you might have received?
Could be like design a chatbot for this content delivery service, something like that, or design an alarm clock that only has one button, and you have to do that in like 20 to 45 minutes.
Gotcha.
Wow.
So I actually can have perspective on that. So we do, our interviews for designers at Etsy do have a whiteboarding challenge that I have facilitated quite a few times. And the thing that I am looking for is how you think. I want to know what kind of, like, the most important things are what questions are you asking? Are you challenging the person who's presenting you that problem with who's the user for this? What's the context that it's going to be used in? Like, how can I get as much information about the goals of this project, about who's going to be using it, about the context, so that if I start approaching it, I'm actually coming from an educated perspective. And it's so important for me to listen to the questions that somebody asks when they first start. That shows me how they think. And that's extremely, extremely important, because the whole, like, how somebody puts together a flow, like, we can teach some of the product design perspective, but are you thinking strategically? Are you thinking from a business perspective? Are you thinking about the user? That's the key thing that I'm looking for.
Yeah, it shouldn't be about the end result. And I think that's...
Especially in 20 to 45 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. There's speaking to that about kind of understanding how you work and how you think. A friend of mine is leading recruiting at a large agency, and he said when they're hiring developers, they do give them a test that they can't complete. And the test is, do they ask for help? And if they don't ask for help, then they know that they're not a right fit for the team.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
So I actually come from the user research side. So I do user research for a video game company. And the biggest challenge that we always have is getting designers and developers to collaborate with us and get on board with us to test early. So kind of like we were talking about Dayton earlier, when you're prototyping, they tend to be very passionate and creative, and they tend to get to that stage of they already love what they made before they actually get us to test it. So getting them to actually iterate is kind of a challenge. So I was just wondering if you guys have any tips on kind of selling the developers and designers on testing early, or just getting them to kind of come to you for help earlier on, as opposed to waiting for a long time to test.
I think Maya might have a better response to this than mine. Mine would generally be like, use a stick.
Yeah, those aren't good designers. So.
I mean, a lot of that comes from the top too, right? Like, sometimes getting the individual designers is not going to, you're trying to convince them to change how they work. But if you've got their managers buy-in, and you've, like, those designers, like, they understand the value of that, they can trickle that down. So make some friends in upper management on the design side.
I also think it's really about design maturity. And a really super amazing, passionate designer might be one, but if they really don't understand that research informs design, then they're really not that good.
Yeah, this gets back to the point about your goal should be to learn from your work, and that's the one thing that I would impart to anybody here. And I think you all buy into that, or you wouldn't be at this conference. But for people who don't buy into that, it's a battle. I mean, if there's ego involved, and they think that they were trained on layout and typography and color, and therefore nobody can speak to them. That's a broken designer. It's a very 1995 designer.
But it's also a broken process at the company, right? So it's like systemic
Definitely.
of a larger thing, because those are the designers in the process that have been hired in. So
yeah, definitely. So good luck.
So, it sounds like continuous learning, innate curiosity, and, collaboration and evolution is definitely the key to continuous success in this field. We are out of time, but I wanted to thank each and every one of you for your thoughts and sharing your experiences with everybody today.
We didn't talk about our failures and successes.
Oh, I'm going to share some of those.
Oh, yeah. Oh, great. Perfect. Great. Right. Talks. Still to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.